May 10, 1940, World War II, Netherlands. Nazi Germany invades Holland and the German air forces, the Luftwaffe, employ paratroopers in the conquest of tactical sites and to support the march of ground troops throughout the nation. Along with strong aerial bombardment of Rotterdam, the assault ends on May 14 with the destruction of its whole historic center. Because the Germans threatened to destroy the city of Utrecht in the same fashion, the Dutch forces surrender one day later. Soon after, the Nazis start to conquer the whole country and impose new anti-Jewish laws which are aimed to expel Jewish people from society and restrict their livelihood. Once more under Nazi dominance, 15,000 Jews escaped Nazi Germany to the Netherlands between 1933 and 1939. One of them is a Jewish adolescent destined to be the most well-known diarist and Frank in the world. Otto and Edith Frank welcomed Annelies Marie Frank into Frankfurt, Germany on June 12, 1929. 3 years her senior, and also had a sister called Margot. Playing practically every day in the garden with the local children, the sisters enjoyed pleasant childhood. Living on the outskirts of Frankfurt, the Franks were liberal Jews living in an assimilated society comprising both Jewish and non-Jewish residents of many religions. Their lives underwent a radical transformation when German President Paul von Hindenburg named Nazi Party leader Adolf Hitler Chancellor of Germany on January 30, 1933. The Nazi dictatorship rapidly proceeded to restrict the civil and human rights of the Jewish people and constructed first the concentration camps, imprisoning its political opponents, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others regarded as dangerous. Otto Frank chose to leave Germany and relocate to the Netherlands in response to commercial difficulties and mounting anti-Semitism. He established a franchise for the Opekta branch in Amsterdam in September 1933, trading in pectin, a gelling agent for jam manufacturing. Not long afterward, the remainder of the family relocated to Amsterdam. Between 1933 and 1939, the Franks were among 300,000 Jews who left Nazi Germany. Following their experiences in the Third Reich, the family felt quickly at ease in Amsterdam and the daughters registered at Dutch universities. They developed new acquaintances and, despite early difficulties with the Dutch language, Margot especially improved as a student. Although the girls were content with their new life in their nation, for their parents the circumstances became more difficult. Otto had to work hard to start his business and provide a fresh life for his family. But when Otto launched Pecticon, a supplier of herbs and spices, in 1938, the family's financial condition got better. Observing the growth in Nazi Germany and its forceful expansion, he even intended to open a new company in Great Britain and relocate there. Unfortunately, this idea did not turn out. September 1, 1939 saw the beginning of the Second World War. 10 years old when Germany attacked the Netherlands on May 10, 1940, was Anne Frank. Once under Nazi control once more, the life of the Franks underwent entirely different transformation. Eventually, the criminal Nazi government from which they fled in 1933 caught up with them in the nation where they would now dwell and had let them feel free to lead their own life. The Netherlands became into an occupied territory, and the Nazis started implementing fresh anti-Semitic laws and rules limiting Jewish life not soon after. Jewish enterprises as well as the Jews themselves had to register, and Jewish civil servants were sacked. Parks, theaters, and non-Jewish stores were no more places they could visit. Many areas consequently became off-limits to Anne, who had to attend different Jewish schools instead of the same one as all Jewish children had to go to. New rules forbade Jews from running their own enterprises, and the Nazis compelled Otto Frank to sell his companies. But Otto had quickly enough transferred management of his firms to his staff to keep them out of Nazi hands. When Jewish males were taken under custody during raids and then sent to the Mauthausen concentration camp, the situation deteriorated in 1941. Among them were friends and acquaintances of the Franks, and shortly tales of their deaths would follow. Understanding the dire nature of things, Otto sought to leave for the United States and Cuba. He never could, however, find the required paperwork. Otto Frank chose to arrange a hiding place in an empty section of his company property at Prinsengracht 263 in spring 1942, expecting deportation of his own family. Announced in the Netherlands on the 29th of April, 1942, rules requiring Jews to wear a yellow emblem in the form of a Star of David for identification were enforced. Those detected without the badge following the 5th of May were imprisoned and housed for 6 weeks. Starting in the summer of 1942, Dutch Jews were methodically sent to the execution camps. Regularly leaving the transit camps at Voet and Westerbork were transports. By September 1944, 107,000 of the 140,000 Jews living in the Netherlands at the start of the Second World War were deported largely for Auschwitz and Sobibor. Little children were also deported. Just 5,000 of the 107,000 returned after the war. The 12th of June, 1942 was most likely the Frank family's last joyful occasion before hiding. That was the day Anne turned 13 and got her diary. A diary she would one day become well known and in which she would record her emotions and ideas amid the trying circumstances to lie ahead. Less than 1 month later, on July 5, 1942, Margot, Anne's sister, got a call up to report for a so-called labor camp in Nazi Germany. Knowing the faith of friends and acquaintances sent to such camps who had never returned, the Franks did not pause for a minute. They hid themselves the next morning in search of freedom from persecution. Family would spend long 761 days in the secret annex. The Van Pels family, Herman, Auguste, and 16-year-old Peter, from whom Anne would get her first kiss in the secret annex, joined the Franks after 7 days. November saw them joined by family friend and dentist Fritz Pfeffer. Thanks to Anne's diary, we know how the Frank family and 4 others spent more than 2 years in a 3-story building entered through a revolving bookcase. Those hiding were entirely dependent on 6 assistants. Between 1942 and 1944, there were staff members and friends of Anne's father who supplied food, clothes, and everything else the 8 secret annex occupants needed. Writing kept Anne occupied, and it was largely to her diary that we could have a glimpse of the daily life of those sheltering. Silence was extremely crucial, especially from 8:30 a.m. when the men working in the warehouse, which was below the hidden annex, started their daily grind. One could get suspicion from any sound. The morning consisted in reading, studying, and getting ready for their lunch break. A handful of the assistants walked up to the secret annex to have lunch with those in hiding about 12:30 p.m. after the warehouse workers left for lunch. Usually staying at the office to monitor things, Miep Geese stayed. The individuals sheltering could see other faces and listen to the Radio Orange, a BBC show where Dutch Queen Wilhelmina, who had fled the invading German soldiers and traveled to England on May 13, 1940, spoke 34 times over the war. While other people in hiding rested in the afternoon, and used to write or study. They then had coffee, made dinner, and at 5:30 p.m. the persons hiding could leave the secret annex and disperse over the building when the warehouse workers left their homes. Dinner would be prepared by them, and as in the morning before the warehouse workers began their working day, they would alternate using the bathroom. After September 1942, when special units, made of Dutch collaborators starting to look for hiding Jews, were established, the situation became increasingly perilous. 25,000 Jews, or so, fled into hiding in the Netherlands. 2/3 of them made it, 1/3 were betrayed and found out. The 8 members of the secret annex belonged to the later group. Though the hiding time came to a sudden end on August 4, 1944, we still do not know the cause for the police raid. Under SS Commander Karl Silberbauer, Dutch police personnel set out to look at a tip-off, Jews hidden in the upper floors of Prinsengracht 263. Otto and the others were taken under custody after the hiding spot was found. Silberbauer scattered the papers and notebooks while he seized their valuables and money. 2 more assistants grabbed the records before the secret annex was cleared by Nazi decree after individuals from the annex were transferred to Gestapo headquarters in Amsterdam. Among other manuscripts, Anne's diary survives. They arrived at the Westerbork transit camp from an Amsterdam prison. They found themselves in the jail barracks, with men and women split apart. Otto had to work during the day. He could spend evening with Edith, Margot, and Anne. 2 weeks later, they were dispatched to the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. Their train arrived last among those leaving Westerbork for this death camp run under Nazi occupation in Poland. And then more than 1,000 others were tightly packed in cattle wagons throughout 3 terrible days of the rail trip. There only was a barrel for a toilet and minimal food and drink. Once at Auschwitz, Nazi physicians investigated who would and would not be able to perform intense forced labor. About 350 ENS transport passengers were taken right away to the gas chambers and killed. Otto ended up in a men's camp. Anne, Margot, and their mother Edith were transported to a labor camp for women. Survivors of the conflict referred to them as a 3-person team, inseparable. Otto never would see them again. Early November 1944 saw Anne and Margot sent to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Their parents stayed behind at Auschwitz. 3 weeks before the Red Army freed the camp, Edith passed away on January 6, 1945 from sickness and weakness. Anne, as bald, emaciated, and shivering, reconnected with her friend Nanette Blitz, who survived the Holocaust, at Bergen-Belsen. She said and thought her parents were dead, thus she did not want to live anymore. But Anne also mentioned that, once the war ends, she dreamed of one day penning a book based on her diaries. Sanitary conditions were appalling, hardly enough water for cooking and drinking, none for washing. About 1/3 of the prisoners who arrived in the transports were already dead, and almost 80% of the rest had to be fetched by truck from the station since they were too weak and sick to walk between January and March 1945 when the prisoners were sent on death marches from the other concentration camps. One time, out of a transportation of 1,900 prisoners, over 500 arrived dead. During these death marches, the captives received practically no sustenance. Likewise, when they arrived at the camp, there was none. The camp was so packed that, in winter when it was bitterly cold, the inmates had to sleep on the floor in a sitting posture and somehow managed to share just 200 blankets in a camp of tens of thousands of inmates. The average daily death rate of prisoners was between 250 and 300 due to typhus outbreaks, dehydration, hunger. Anne and Margot both caught typhus under these appalling circumstances. Gina Turgel, a survivor of Bergen-Belsen who worked in the camp hospital and knew and remembers seeing her and in her own words stated and was delirious, terrible and burning up. She also packed and water for washing. Sadly though, Anne and her sister did not survive. Anne died 1 day later following Margot's fall from her bunk in a weakened state and shock-related death. Typhus caused both of their deaths in February 1945, Margot first, and soon after. Initially, it was thought that the sisters passed on April 15, 1945, a few weeks before the liberation of the camp. Later on, though, it turned out they might have passed away in February. Among the millions of victims sentenced to death by malnutrition, dehydration, diseases, poor treatment or annihilation with Zyklon B gas are Anne and Margot. One man from the Secret Annex did, however, survive. Otto was the father of Anne. The 27th of January, 1945 saw his release when the Soviets arrived at Auschwitz. On the way back to the Netherlands he found out that his wife Edith had died, but he hoped that Anne and Margot had somehow survived. He returned to the liberated Netherlands on the 3rd of June, 1945, 9 days before what would have been Anne's 16th birthday. All hope was lost 1 month later when he learned about the death of his daughters. Miep Gies, one of the helpers of the Secret Annex, passed him Anne's diary. After he found enough courage to read it, he was astonished by her writing. He also read about Anne's dreams to become a writer and journalist and her intention to publish her stories about their life in the Secret Annex after the war would be over. In the end, Anne's dreams would come true. First 3,000 copies of her book, Secret Annex, were published in 1947. Since then, the book has been translated into over 70 languages. People all over the world were introduced to Anne's story, and in 1960, the hiding place, which for 2 years became the home to 8 people who tried to survive the atrocities of the criminal Nazi regime, became a museum, the Anne Frank House. Today, you can even visit her room that has walls brightened with picture postcards and movie stars which Anne collected, and see her original diary and other manuscripts which she wrote until her arrest. Anne Frank, a teenage girl who perished in the death camp and whose only sin was that she was a Jew, has become a symbol which will live forever and will always remind us of the dangers of discrimination and racism, and hatred towards each other. Thanks for watching. Don't miss our next videos. Click the subscribe button now for more interesting clips. Offer us a like and see you in the next episode.